I call this video Stones Styles, the Big Picture. And what I'm trying to do here is basically help us cash in on all of the detailed study you've done of Rolling Stones music going all the way back to week one. One of the things, as I've said a number of times during the course, that musicologists try to do is they try to take a large repertory of songs that are from all kinds of different times, all kinds of different styles, and try to tell a story or create an orderly picture of the stuff so that we can kind of create a hierarchy and understand how things fit together. The way I will sometimes refer to this in my classes with students here at the University of Rochester is I will say, imagine that as students of the Rolling Stones between 1962 and 1974, every song they wrote was on a piece of sheet music, a single sheet music thing like you used to be able to buy at the store. It just has one song. And it was a big pile laid all around the floor. And somebody came into them and they said, well, we're going to have to organize this stuff. We can't find anything. It's all just laying around here. I got to root through everything to get to the thing I want. It takes me forever. Let's get it organized. Okay, how shall we organize it? Well, we could organize it alphabetically, as sometimes happens in songbooks, right? And so all the songs that start with A are first, and whatever song starts with Z is at the end. That'd be one way to do it. You could do it chronologically. Let's just organize it according to when these songs were recorded or released or that kind of thing. And that's kind of what we've done in this course, right? We've grouped them together into albums and singles, and it's been a little bit messy when we had different UK versions and US versions, but still, it's a lot more organized just having it just sort of laying out there. Here's everything that was recorded in 1964, say, have at it, right? So we've kind of laid it out chronologically. Now, what I want to do is go back through it and see if we can find connecting points between songs using style as our lens. And I'm not even including all the possible ways that we could do that. Another way to do it might be to think about lyric topics. So how about songs that have to do with lost love or frustration or dissatisfaction, and we could sort of find a trail back that way. So just follow me as we go and see if you don't find that this is a useful way of creating a kind of a bigger picture that helps us see over the span of, really close to a decade of Rolling Stones music. Now, at the end of the week 2 lectures, or somewhere at the end of one of those videos, I gave you a list of the styles used in cover versions, and you can see that on the screen here. What I said at that point was, I articulated 6 styles that we saw a lot in the cover versions. We saw blues, that would feature songs by Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Jimmy Reed, among others. Rock and roll, Chuck Berry, Larry Williams, records. And when I say songs, most of these times I'm talking about the records they recorded, even if the songs were written by somebody else. Soul, we saw a lot of Solomon Burke and Otis Redding recordings being covered. Country, we saw the Hank Snow cover version on Got Live If You Want It. Heart of Stone, we talked about country. Gospel, Time Is On My Side, The Last Time, both of those sort of coming out of gospel kinds of things. And pop with the song Tell Me, Congratulations, some of that kind of thing. So this is what we see in the cover version. In other words, we got to the end of those 4 albums and all the cover versions, we organized them and said, well, what are the different styles they're doing in the covers, and we kind of tried to organize it that way. Now, as we moved into week 3 and forward, we've said, now, how does what we know about what they covered figure into what they wrote when they were writing their own material? Because remember, Aftermath comes along, and it's an album of completely new material, right? Then you've got Between the Buttons, and so you get an awful lot of Mick and Keith new material, the Rolling Stones doing their own arrangements. And one of the things we did was we began to sort of look at all the tracks on the album and say, okay, well, this one sort of comes out of the soul thing, this one comes out of the blues thing, this one comes out of the country, this one's got the gospel, that kind of thing. Well, let's take that all the way up to Exile on Main Street. What I want to do is I'm going to go through some of those same styles now, and I'm going to list the songs on Exile on Main Street. Almost all of them originals except for the blues covers that I'm going to mention here. All original songs except for the blues covers, and we'll talk about which songs fit into being influenced by which of these categories. Some of them will be in be in 2 categories at once because there's more than one influence there, right? But just gives us a chance to use that lens to look at the material here in 1972. So let's have at it here. Blues, I would say there's a certain amount of blues or electric blues in Casino Boogie, Turd on the Run, and Ventilator Blues. The blues covers that we see on this album are Shake Your Hips, a Slim Harpo, and Stop Breaking Down, a Robert Johnson recording. For country, we've got Sweet Virginia, Torn and Frayed, Loving Cup. For soul, we've kind of got Tumbling Dice, kind of some elements of Let It Loose. That's why I put that in parentheses there. When we get to gospel, Tumbling Dice has kind of got some gospel, but I Just Want to See His Face, very big gospel influence, and I just went on about the gospel influence on Shine a Light, so that's pretty clear there. Psychedelic, tougher to find the psychedelic influences on Exile on Main Street. Let It Loose has got a little bit of that kind of psychedelic electric guitar thing going on, so that's probably about the closest you're going to get. Singer-songwriter, also not a lot of singer-songwriter, although probably the Sweet Black Angel song about Angela Davis probably comes closer to the spirit of the singer-songwriter kind of song, even if it does go a little bit sort of Jamaican or calypso in terms of the way, or reggae, in the way that the song is arranged. And then the rockers, of course, we've got a couple of those: Rocks Off, Rip This Joint, Happy, all down the line, and Soul Survivor. So if we take the original categories, some of the same original categories that we use for covers, and apply them to Exile on Main Street, we can pretty much slot everything in. Not to say that that's the only way this music is important or interesting, but it does help us sort of see the influence. Now, the next thing would be, what if we started from the album just before Exile on Main Street, Sticky Fingers? Let's see if we can get our way all the way back to 1965 with that first bunch of singles that they had that were so big in 65, and maybe even earlier than that to some of the first Rolling Stones songs that were recorded Jagger Richards. If we can follow a trail back, the blues trail, the country trail, then we're really starting to see long-term connections across the group's career. And of course, where that trail ends in 65 or 64 gets picked up by the cover versions they were doing in the periods going back to some of their very first recordings. So let's see how that goes. Let's track these styles back from 72 back into 1964 and 1965. Let's start with blues. And again, I'm not even picking all the songs. I'm just picking some likely candidates, and it's a shorter list. You could probably make a more exhaustive list if you wanted to. So we start with blues. Well, Beggar's Banquet features Parachute Woman. Who's Driving Your Plane? A B-side, and then takes us all the way back to Don't Bother Me, which is on Aftermath, and this is the Rolling Stones writing their own blues tunes. How about blues covers? Well, on Sticky Fingers, you've got You Gotta Move, their cover of Fred McDowell. Love in Vain on Let It Bleed, their cover of Robert Johnson. Prodigal Son on Beggar's Banquet, their cover of Robert Wilkins. Please Go Home on Between the Buttons, their cover of a Bo Diddley tune. So you can take those blues covers, and of course, those blues covers can go all the way back to the very first recorded songs of the Rolling Stones in terms of cover versions. Let's follow the country strand back. So if we start country with Sweet Virginia, Torn and Frayed, and Love and Cup on Exile on Main Street, we can follow that back through Dead Flowers on Sticky Fingers, Country Honk on Let It Bleed, Dear Doctor on Beggar's Banquet, High and Dry on Aftermath, and then finally the single Heart of Stone. And so you see a really clear country line going all the way back, and that's not even mentioning their cover of the Hank Snow song. All right, let's try the soul line going back, starting from Kinda Tumbling Dice and Let It Loose that I talked about just a minute ago. We can go to I Got the Blues on Sticky Fingers, back to Midnight Rambler on Let It Bleed, She Smiled Sweetly on Between the Buttons, What to Do on Aftermath, and I think if you want to take that soul thing all the way back, you can take it back to I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Remember the influence of Martha and the Vandellas. I mentioned Dancing in the Streets, but also take a look at Nowhere to Run. That's also a very important Martha and Vandellas influence there. Anyway, clearly soul music from Martha and Vandella, Motown soul, and so that takes that soul line all the way back. All right, what about gospel? Well, we spent a lot of time talking about gospel on Exile on Main Street. I Just Want to See His Face, Shine a Light. How far can we take that back? How about Gimme Shelter on Let It Bleed, Salt of the Earth on Beggar's Banquet, and finally back to The Last Time. Right? That song, one of the big hits of 1965, which of course was based on a version of a song by the Staple Singers a gospel group. So that one works pretty well. Psychedelic, we couldn't find a lot on Exile on Main Street, maybe Let It Loose, but as we continue to go back, Moonlight Mile on Sticky Fingers, You Can't Always Get What You Want on Let It Bleed, 2,000 Light Years from Home on Their Satanic Majesty's Request, We Love You, going all the way back to Ruby Tuesday. And of course, we could look at most of Their Satanic Majesty's Request for psychedelia stuff there. Singer-songwriter, we said maybe Sweet Black Angel on Exile on Main Street. We can go back through Wild Horses on Sticky Fingers, No Expectations on Beggar's Banquet, The Lantern on Their Satanic Majesty's Request, Backstreet Girl on Between the Buttons, and finally, maybe the earliest singer-songwriter, As Tears Go By, and of course that takes us right back to 1965, actually into 1964, Marianne Faithfull, if you want to do that. And then of course rockers, it's a rich history of rockers. After all, the Stones primarily a rock band, from Rocks Off, Rip This Joint Happy, all down the line, Soul Survivor, all on Exile on Main Street. We can go back through to Brown Sugar on Sticky Fingers, Honky Tonk Woman, a single, Street Fightin' Man on Beggar's Banquet, Jumpin' Jack Flash, a single, Citadel on Their Satanic Majesty's Request, Let's Spend the Night Together, back to Get Off of My Cloud, taking us back to 1965. So in the case of almost all of these styles, we can trace a trail back from Exile on Main Street, back to 1965 to 1964, and from there we can pick up the trail with the cover versions that I presented in week 2. We can see a really big picture of the Stones following this sort of multiple layers of different kinds of styles, sometimes blending them together in the same song. And that's the kind of picture that I want to leave you with as we head into the 7th week of the course. That is, when we get done with this course, I'm hoping that you've learned an awful lot about the details, and I've really sort of emphasized the details, I'll admit, with a lot of this stuff. But what I really want you to start to see is, having looked at all this music, to step back and see the big picture of the development. And I'm trying to give some order to the development so that when you look at it, you can say, oh, I see, well, looking along these lines, I can really see the development of the group. I can see them developing, changing, rearranging, and reorganizing things. And that's one of the important things we really try to do as musicologists when we study a repertory. So as I said, next week, we're going to conclude the class with lectures on Goat's Head Soup and It's Only Rock and Roll. And at that point, I'll ask the question, is this the end of an era,